Okay, UFC fans, this weekend, May the 9th, the wait is finally over. The UFC finally returns to Florida for UFC 249 on what looks to be a very, very stacked card. We've been doing a lot of pre-fight analysis for a lot of the big fights on it. And right now, let's take a closer look at my favorite fight on the card. We're talking Cruz, we're talking Cejudo, we're talking Team Shrugs. This fight at 135 pounds is so that we can finally find out who is the true bantamweight king. It's been a division full of lots of hills and plateaus. We're talking about Dominic the Dominator Cruz way back in his WEC days, and he was the first ever bantamweight champ of the UFC. He was riding high on that throne for a while until sidelined by injuries. And then Renan Barão picked up the title and started running with it. He ran straight into TJ Dillashaw's fists, not once, but twice, and TJ was then crowned the bantamweight king. TJ would then go on, looking very impressive, until Dominic returned and did something that many skeptics thought was completely impossible. He showed us that ring rust was nothing but something we talked about in our minds, and he reclaimed the bantamweight title. He had a short stint of defending that title until ultimately losing it in a pretty close fight to Cody Garbrandt. Cody ran into TJ's fists, not once, but twice, and TJ again became the bantamweight king. He was sidelined and has been sitting out due to a violation in PED use, but not before being knocked out cold by Henry Cejudo at 125 pounds. Henry then jumped up to the 135-pound mark and has been the bantamweight king ever since. It's real interesting to see how these two are going to pair off. This is Cruz versus Cejudo. It's an interesting matchup because on paper, Henry Cejudo is the far superior wrestler, and Dominic Cruz is possibly the superior striker, who's been sidelined by a lot of injury and is possibly aged out of the game. Over here getting to watch Dominic Cruz at his best. He's at his best when he is feinting, throwing that one single jab, and then backpedaling. And as we see, he moves away there and throws that counter overhand right. We'll see it again in slow motion here, right on the button. The footwork just typically seems to be too much for people, and then it enables him to change levels like he just did there for the takedown. Dominic claims to have modeled his footwork after the legendary Willie Pep. Dominic has a background in boxing as well as wrestling, and his wrestling seems to be a lot better than his pedigree would suggest, as he was a high school wrestler and didn't go much further than that. He's absolutely one of the best minds in the sport, and we can see here again the level change, and he takes the opponent down. Here he is against Dillashaw. Now if we watch, and we'll see a lot of this here, for the first two, almost 3 rounds of this fight, TJ didn't really land a strike on Dominic. A lot of things that look like they landed, then he's missing them by inches. And typically, it's the best defensive fighters that are making you miss by just this much. So that way you're staying in range to be hit. Here he is against Cody Garbrandt. And here's a Dominic Cruz that is fighting emotional, not fighting the same way. You can see how he's pushing forward and swinging wildly, as opposed to landing a jab and then pedaling back and on an angle, which is what is typical of him. Even the way he shot for that takedown was not the same. The level change wasn't the same. We've got Cejudo here and Moraes. And this is Henry looking his best towards the end of that fight, where he turned it around and started to dominate the fight. He's a very, very strong guy. Obviously a gold medal Olympic wrestler. So on paper, he's certainly the better wrestler of the two. Here he is, dominating TJ. And how he was able to do that was wait on that kick and kind of push TJ down, and then really just kind of bully forward. Henry's like a small type ball of energy, and he just kind of bullies forward on these guys, lands heavy leather, sticks that chin down. He's got a great chin, and pushes forward, as you see there. Their pedigree suggests that Henry Cejudo should easily be able to dominate Dominic by taking him down and finishing the fight with some ground and pound. I think it's easier said than done, because we've seen that even though he's only been a high school wrestler, Dominick Cruz is no slouch, right? He's excellent in the scramble, and he is very, very difficult to take down to begin with. We saw this when he fought Mighty Mouse. He was able to absolutely ragdoll Demetrius for 5 rounds, something Henry couldn't do. Actually, Henry's victory over Mighty Mouse is still controversial in my eyes. It was a very, very close fight, and for the sports benefit, it might have been what we needed at the time, but still, not so sure that he actually won the fight. From the standing position, Henry's strength really lies in his ability to press forward, time his opponent, and wait for them to throw a strike that he can counter. And he counters with some really heavy leather. We saw it in the Dillashaw fight. We saw it in the Marias fight. He was able to judge distance and timing and really land some heavy shots. When he's got somebody hurt, he's made excellent use of his wrestling, and that's where he's been most dominant. Dominick Cruz makes best use of his footwork going back and on the angle. Never straight back and never straight forward. Even when he's approaching forward to throw a strike, he's doing it on a slipped angle. This is why that overhand right that he throws is so effective, going both forwards and backwards. Also, when pressing forwards, he pairs it with the overhand right and then always to the low kick on the opposite side, on the opposite angle. During the Garbrandt fight, we saw a different Dominick Cruz. We saw somebody fighting much more emotional, that was pushing forward, not hitting the same angles, and almost swinging wildly. He wasn't waiting for the counter punch, and he allowed Garbrandt to dictate that pace and become the counter puncher. Cruz is not an offensive puncher. He is a pure counter puncher with incredible angular footwork. So can Cejudo close that gap in distance and take advantage on the inside with sharp and heavy counter punching? That's the question. What does he typically do? He typically has that hand out, that lead hand out, and uses it as almost an antenna with which to measure the distance, see his opponent's reaction, that quick twitch, and then throw that backhand. The common misconception is that counter punchers are always going backwards and then throwing a punch off their opponent's strike. This isn't really true. You can absolutely press the action forward, apply pressure, and still be the counter puncher. The first person that comes to mind with regards to this is Conor McGregor. He does it excellently, and Henry Cejudo does something very similar. He uses that antenna of a hand to manage the distance, especially since most of the time the opponents are taller guys. So he manages the distance, waits for the mistake, feels, and then drops the hammer. And he does very well with that. And obviously, if he can do that in conjunction with then closing the distance and taking Dominic down, this is his fight through and through. But that's a lot easier said than done when you have Dominick Cruz, who, if he remains composed during the fight, is a master counterpuncher with master class footwork. And what I mean by that is his angles. When he's stepping backwards, he's never just stepping backwards. He's stepping backwards, typically on the angle. We find that most often he likes to step and dip to this right side, and when he dips to the right side, he's always got his head just off the line of center and throwing that right hand, that over right hand where he's clipping guys. And again, it may look like he's getting hit often, but typically punchers are going just by him. When we look at the best defensive fighters in the world, we see that they're not making guys miss by miles. They're making you miss by centimeters. That way, they are just outside of your range, and you are just within their range. This is a super, super interesting fight. It's really, really exciting. It's been teased to us for a while, and I'm glad this is the fight we get. As much as I enjoy seeing Jose Aldo fight, I didn't think that that was really the fight for the 135-pound crown. I really do prefer this one. I'm a big Dominick Cruz fan, and I'm a fan of what Henry Cejudo has been able to do for the sport at the lower weights. I'm very, very excited for this one. It is absolutely my fight pick for UFC 249. As you guys probably know, I hate making the fight picks, but if I have to do this one, I'm going to lean towards a healthy, focused, and ready Dominick Cruz, and I'm going to go with a 5-round decision. He's going to slide out of the line of fire often, throw that overhand right, be hell for Henry to take down, and ultimately be too quick and too efficient and effective a striker as the fight continues to go on. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I hope to see you guys after this weekend so we could do some post-fight analysis on UFC 249. And as always, please come back to the channel to check out more content like this. Thank you guys for joining. Team Shrugs.